Okay, so let's get going. Thanks again, everybody, for joining to the exciting webinar. Today we will cover the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite, or XAMS, our key solution that we have. We'll first talk a little bit about Xiting. Some of you may already know the company, so we'll keep that brief. Then we're going to go right into some of the offerings we have, including the XAMS. We'll dive into the details of what the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite can do and how it can help you. Then we look at some of the references and contact information, and we'll wrap it up with questions at the end. Real brief, Xiting was founded in 2008 by SAP security consultants. We're headquartered in Switzerland. We have about, well, actually 50 employees right now, with offices in Germany, Switzerland, England, and as of August, also in the United States. Most of our senior consultants are also SAP trainers, and we do deliver a lot of training classes for and through SAP. You can see some of those workshops and training courses on the right that we deliver in Germany and Switzerland. We're currently in the process of bringing some of those classes over to the United States, starting with the advanced SAP authorizations. Beyond training, we also do or provide services and support in the area of compliant identity and role management, or SIRM as they call it, SAP Access Control, RFC optimization, IDM, single sign-on, enterprise threat detection, HANA migration, and so on. But the core solution that I would like to talk to you about today is the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite, or XAMS. The XAMS has three main use areas. As the name implies, one of those use areas is around roles and authorizations. So the XAMS can help you automate many of the manual tasks that are often involved in optimizing, analyzing, and redesigning your roles. It can help with testing of new roles in a production type of environment, and we call it productive test simulation. We can significantly reduce the risk during go-live. We can help you with optimizing your RFC interfaces. That's one of the key services that we provide with the XAMS, because very often customers have SAP all type of authorizations for the RFC interfaces just to make sure those interfaces work. But obviously that comes at a risk. There's a security concern with giving too many authorizations to an interface, and with the XAMS we can help you deauthorize that interface very easily and risk-free, even if that interface only exists in a production type of environment. The second use area is around ABAP code scanning. So we have one module that can help you analyze your custom ABAP code. We can look for missing authorization checks, certain SQL statements, critical ABAP keywords, and many, many other finding patterns that can help you improve the quality and security of your code. We also use that module to optimize your SU24. And the last use area is around SAP security concepts, where we deliver ready-to-use security concepts. And by security concept, I mean a written document that explains how SAP is supposed to be set up to follow best practice guidelines, security guidelines. We used our own experience to create those concepts, and we got input from Ernst & Young and PwC to build a concept that you can use as is and make sure your system is in compliance with that concept. Now that concept has also built-in checks that can verify your systems to make sure they are in fact compliant with the concept, and can point out where you are out of compliance. So it's an automation tool again that you can use as part of a security audit maybe, or in preparation for a security audit. Generally speaking, the XAMS is a suite of modules. As of this point, or in reality as of the next service pack, it contains 7 modules that you can see here in that circle diagram on the right. And those modules can be used and of course also licensed individually, or in combination. So sometimes you may only want to analyze your existing roles without really doing anything, and you can use one particular module to do exactly that. But sometimes, especially when you're in the middle of, or when you're planning on doing a complete role redesign, you would very likely use a combination of those modules. From a technical perspective, the XAMS is built in ABAP using only standard APIs and interfaces. We live in our own table and namespace, so you can very easily install the XAMS through a transport, do your work, and then very easily, if need be, or if you wish to do so, uninstall it through a transport. And we don't leave any trace behind. And the advantage of leveraging only standard APIs of SAP is that there is virtually zero risk when you upgrade your SAP system while the XAMS is installed. That's an important point for us because we don't want to break anything when you upgrade SAP. And we sometimes even make sacrifices when it comes to features that we could implement, but that would require maybe a customization or a code change of standard code, and we'd rather not do that and stick to the standards and make sure we are as compatible as we can be. Here are some of our implementation partners in Europe. I've mentioned EY and PwC before, but also SAP Consulting is using the XAMS specifically for RFC interface optimizations. There is even an SAP or OSS note that recommends the XAMS if you're dealing with RFC interfaces, and I'll show that note later on. Many of the people I talk to ask me, well, isn't the XAMS to a certain degree in competition maybe with GRC, specifically with access control, because we do have some capability to look for segregation of duty issues or combinations of critical authorizations and so on. And even though there is a tiny overlap, for the most part, we see IDM, GRC, and the XAMS as complementary solutions. And SAP has realized that as well. This is in fact a slide from SAP, from an SAP slide deck. And as part of SAP's Compliant Identity and Role Management Initiative, they've come to the realization that by using the XAMS on the backend systems, they can in fact expedite IDM and GRC implementations, because very often when you want to deploy IDM or GRC, you have to look at your existing role concept on those backends and make changes or optimizations or make them more, for the lack of a better term, compatible with GRC and IDM and those business role concepts. So XAMS can do that and can therefore speed up an implementation of IDM and GRC. Now, one of the core features of XAMS is obviously to help with role redesigns. And there are many reasons why you may need to redesign your role concept or optimize what you have. Could be a migration to HANA, especially S/4HANA with its change data models. It could be that you want to simplify your role administration. There may be organizational changes going on, or you're just upgrading your ERP system. So there are many reasons why a role optimization or redesign project may be necessary. And the problem with doing that in a traditional sense is that it requires a lot of time, effort, and as a result, money to do that. Because many of the tasks involved in a role optimization or redesign are manual, and they take a lot of time and consequently cost a lot of money. And when we look at a more or less typical role redesign project, these are the steps that we very often see. So you start with maybe your SU25 upgrade. So you import the new proposal that SAP has delivered. You do a trace and statistical data analysis. So you look at what your users were doing and executing in terms of transactions over the past 3 or so months. And then with that trace data, you create a spreadsheet that contains all the users and all your roles, and you try to make sense of that. You try to connect your users with the roles that they need. And then you may go to the business user and say, hey, this is our proposal. Can you please check off what you really need and let me know what you don't need? The problem with that approach is that most business users don't know what roles and authorizations they need. They can only tell you what their job entails and what transactions they need to be able to execute and so on. But how that translates into technical roles and authorizations is often beyond the skill set of your users. So there is a lot of interpretation and back and forth involved, which is time consuming. But once you have your huge spreadsheet filled out and ready to roll, you have to manually implement those roles in PFCG. So you basically have to do duplicate work. Then you build out your roles manually. You do your org field maintenance, which is another area where you can spend a lot of time. And once you're done with that, you have to test those new roles. And of course, you do the testing in a quality control or quality assurance environment or a testing environment. And there too, you have to involve your business users because they have to tell the testers exactly what they need to do, where to click, what transactions to execute. And that too is a time-consuming process. And if there is something missing in a role and the tester cannot proceed, then the tester has to wait until the role admin has fixed whatever needs to be fixed before moving on. So there is potentially a lot of productivity lost during the time when the role admin fixes whatever the tester requires to continue with testing. And then at some point when you have tested and you feel your role concept is now good, you go live and you cross your fingers and you hope that everything goes well. But very often things don't go well because you may have forgotten something. And that's where the risk of a go live is involved. With the XAMS, we tackle every single one of those steps and help you either automate where we can or improve the quality of the work that you're doing. And it starts usually also with an SU25 update, but then we spend a lot of time in comparison to everything else that we are doing on making sure you have a solid SU24. So we think by having solid proposals, you are much more likely to build high quality roles. So we give you a list of our own proposals that we have developed over the years based on our experience. We can scan your custom code and look for authorization checks that may not be covered in SU24 yet. We can analyze your existing role concept and look at your SU24 and see what's missing. If there is maybe certain fields that neither have S-tabunam nor S-tabudis, then we tell you, okay, this is maintain one or the other. So you have a solid SU24. Then too, we run statistically traced data. We use ST03N, let that run for X number of months. But then instead of creating a spreadsheet out of the findings, we allow you to virtually design your roles using what we call the role designer. With the role designer, you can load your trace data in. You get to see a list of all the transactions. You get to see a list of all your users. And then by a drag and drop, you can create new roles and assign them virtually to your users and immediately see how well a user would be covered with that virtual role assignment based on your statistical trace data. You can test those new roles, those virtual roles, against SOD conflicts. We can make calls into SAP Access Control at that point. We have our own testing engine built in that you can use to make sure those virtual roles are really solid and good before you push the button and we deploy all those roles into PFCG. So that part you can do automatically and you don't have to do that manually. Then you finalize your roles, hopefully based on a good SU24, and then we allow you to mass replicate those roles across what we call org sets. So the whole org field maintenance becomes significantly easier, and we'll go into details on how that exactly works in a bit. Once you have done your role design, your creation, your mass replication, we allow you to test your new roles in production by your actual users without having to assign those roles to the users. And that's what we call a productive test simulation, which is an ingenious feature really, and allows you to risk-free test new roles in production. And I'll show you exactly how that works in a bit. And then last but not least, we have what we call protected go-live, where we allow an end user to get back his or her old roles for a temporary period of time if something goes wrong during go-live with those new roles. And I'll explain exactly what that means in a bit as well. Now, very often, before you go into a role redesign, you want to analyze your current role concept. And for that, we use the role profiler. The role profiler is meant to determine the quality of your existing role concept. So here on the right, you see some of the test categories or report categories that we offer. You basically select your roles that you want to test. You select a test report and we'll give you the results. You can check for such things as manual authorizations in your roles, open authorizations, changed authorizations. We can test your derived roles to see if they're out of sync. We can check for naming convention issues. We can tell you if certain roles have a change or update activity. So if you want to select all your read-only roles, for instance, we tell you if there is any activity in there that is more than just read-only. Or you can select all your non-HR roles, and we tell you if any of those roles have authorizations that leads to HR access or master data access, and so on. We also have role versioning capabilities built in. I'm going to skip here to the next screen, which has a more comprehensive but still incomplete list of all the reports we offer. But with the role versioning, what we allow you to do is whenever someone makes a change to a role in PFCG, we automatically create a version of that role so that you can always revert back to an older version if you figure out that whatever changes you made don't work. Many of those tests and reports you can make part of your role transporting mechanism. So when you release a transport or before you release a transport to update roles or add new roles, we run through those test reports and tell you if there is something wrong. And then you can make the decision to fix whatever needs to be fixed before releasing the transport, or you can say, okay, I'm okay with those findings and they're on purpose, and you release the transport regardless. We also have HANA reporting capabilities, and with the next service pack, we'll add features that allow you to tell you exactly what you need to change in your role concept of your legacy ERP system before you can migrate to S/4HANA. Because S/4HANA has a change data model. Many transactions don't exist anymore. Some have been consolidated into different transactions. So your role concept, as you have it on your legacy system, doesn't work as is, and you need to make changes. What changes is usually a manual task to find out, but with our HANA reporting capabilities, we tell you exactly what roles you need to change and how you need to change them before they are S/4HANA compatible. Here is an example of a critical authorizations watchdog where I've selected all my Z roles and I've launched the critical authorizations watchdog, and I get a list of all the roles that have critical authorizations. Now, we deliver you a template or a list of what we think are critical authorizations, but of course you can add to that list or change it. If you have custom transactions, for example, that you deem critical, you can add them to that list and they would show up here as well. The arrow column here in the middle and on the screenshot in the background here gives you an indication of how many critical authorizations were found in any given role. And you can double click on that and you get a detailed list of what those critical authorizations are. and then you can make a decision if you want to mitigate that or not. This example is really meant as a time saver. What we allow you to do is to create user menus based on trace data. So based on your ST03N, you get a list of users with their favorites that they have right now, the favorites that they have used based on the trace data, the transactions that they used beyond what's in their favorites, and then certain combinations thereof. And for every user or a selection of users, you can select multiple users or user groups. You can export those transactions into a text file and then import into PFCG to create the user menu. So you can create a user menu for user, let's say there is one that says mkummer, that happens to be me here. I can select mkummer and get a menu that contains all the transactions that I executed in the past 3 months. And that menu is neatly formatted the same way as it would be if you were to create that menu manually. So it's a huge time saver. You don't have to add transactions one by one. You just export the menu based on statistical trace data, import it into PFCG, and you have your menu. The next module that I'd like to cover is the ABAP Alchemist. That's our custom ABAP code scanner, and it can check for a number of patterns such as missing authorization checks. It can optimize existing authorization checks it finds. It can look at certain ABAP keywords and statements, and it can compare your authorization checks with SU24. So if there is any authorization checks in your custom code that's not in SU24, we can point that out, and by just a click, you can add what's missing to SU24. This is how you set it up, or how you start a check run. First, you select your object type that you would like to scan. That could be a role, that could be a transaction, could be a program, could be really anything, a package, a module. You select what you would like to scan. You select the finding pattern, so authorization checks, debugging code, critical ABAP keywords, and so on. You select the maximum depth, so whenever it finds it jumps off to another program maybe, you can define or limit how far it keeps jumping to limit the time of testing basically. And then you execute the report and you get a list of findings that you can sort by priority. Green means it's informational, so you can potentially hide those informational findings. Yellow means warning, and red, which I don't show here but probably should, would be something like a missing authorization check, something critical that you definitely want to fix. And then you can double click and exactly jump to that line of code where that finding occurred. The next module is the role designer. That's the module that allows you to virtually design your roles and test them. So the assumption is that we often operate under is that your users have too many and too far-reaching authorizations. So you want to deauthorize them based on the transactions they actually executed versus what they have as part of their profiles and roles. So let me skip forward here to the UI. You can load your trace data. On the left-hand side, you would then see all the transactions that were executed. On the right-hand side, you can see all the users that were part of the trace. And in the middle column, you can either create new roles manually and then drag and drop over transactions from the left, or you can load role templates that we provide for common job functions. But either way, you can then drag and drop your virtually created roles to your users and immediately see how well they are covered by that virtual role assignment. So you can first see how many transactions they used based on the trace data, how many they are still unauthorized for, and what their coverage percentage is. And that way, you can immediately see how well your newly created roles would work for a user based on the statistical trace data. And this is a design view. We also have a reporting view where you can get more details and can test your virtual roles against SOD conflicts. You can, again, look at the coverage percentage. You could, for instance, find better matching roles. So you can say, give me roles that fit better for my users, meaning that roles that are smaller but still cover the user well enough. You could also, for instance, select all your finance users and say, give me a role that contains all the transactions they executed in common. So you get a base role that has everything those guys have executed over the past 3 or so months. And you can then assign that base role to all the finance guys and then just add on as you see fit. You can also test against SOD conflicts from here. You can reach out to SAP Access Control or use our built-in engine. Either way, you virtually design your new roles. Everything you see in here is not in PFCG yet, it's all virtually. But once you're happy with your virtual role design, you can push a button and we publish all those roles into PFCG. So you don't have to do that manually. The next step then is to replicate those roles. So again, we allow you to virtually model your organization, maybe based on location or based on business unit or a combination thereof. You add your company or your org fields to your so-called org sets, and you define your values. And then you can assign a template role to an org set and mass replicate that role across all the other org sets in that org set group. That makes it significantly easier to replicate roles and have a consistent role concept. Now, in addition to the mass replication, we also allow you to see if your virtual model is still in sync with PFCG. Because if someone goes into PFCG and manually modifies one of those roles that you have replicated, you would see it in here as being out of sync. So green here means in the status column that your role and your model are in sync. Yellow means there is a discrepancy. Someone made a change. And you can click on compare and see exactly what the differences are. And then you can click on sync and simply override what's in PFCG with your model. And if you ever have to add a company code or change a value, you can do it in here in the role replicator. And by adding it into one place and click sync, we replicate that change down to all the affected roles. So you no longer have to go into PFCG, open up every role, and make a change to your org fields, even if you do it in the org field level. You can do it in here once, and we replicate it down to all the affected roles. It's a huge time saver. The next module you would then use once you have analyzed, designed, replicated your roles, you go into testing. And I've mentioned before, we allow you to test in production. In reality, the role builder has two key features that can help you. One is the productive test simulation, and let me explain you how that works. So with the PTS, you can define your test users, quote-unquote test users. You can mass create reference users for those testers, and you can assign your newly created roles to the reference users. So you leave your users with the roles they've had. You're not going to change anything for the actual user. But you add your new roles to the reference users, and then you add the reference user, or you connect the reference user to the actual user. So if you think about that graphically or visually, every user has then the new roles in the backpack through that reference user. But at the same time, every user still has the old roles. So what that means is when the user does his or her job, everything they used to be able to do, they can still do because they still have their old roles. But thanks to a change that SAP did for us a while ago, whenever the SAP kernel does an authorization check, it does it against the reference user first. And that's a huge advantage, because what that means is if you have a user who used to have access to, let's say, SU01 to maintain users, but in the new role, that transaction SU01 is missing, and the user with that backpack goes into SU01, the user would be able to get in. But the SAP kernel would log a failed authorization check for the reference user and the new roles. But it's not truly a failed authorization check, because the authorization is still there in the old roles. It only failed against the reference user. And that error code that's produced by SAP, we can see and collect, and because of that, we know that there was a failed auth check that used to work for the user, but it would have failed with the new roles. So that's maybe something we have to fix in the new role, if that's a transaction the user really needs to have, right? So what that means is your testers in production, they just go about doing their job. They don't even need to know that they're testing, but in the background, they have those new roles in the backpack, and we collect all the failed authorization checks that would have failed if those users already had their new roles, which they don't have yet. So we can use all that information, maybe once a week, scoop all those error codes up, go back to dev, update the roles, transport them up, and after that, there's going to be less error codes until we are happy with the quality of our new roles. And here you can see a test report with a return code column, and then return code 0 means an authorization check that failed against the reference user but was successful against the actual user. Those are the ones we need to look at and say, this is probably something that we have forgotten in the new role, so let's add that in. Don't get too confused about the coloring scheme. The coloring scheme is mostly used for the second feature of the role builder, and that's the ability to automatically create delta roles. So if you want to use the role builder in your queue or dev environment, you can set it up so that whenever an authorization check fails for a user, in 3 seconds or less, our software creates a delta role that has what the user was missing. So the user can immediately try again, and it'll work. Let's use the SU01 example again. A tester in queue used to have SU01, now doesn't have it anymore in the new role, tries to go into SU01, authorization check fails, user can't get in. User tries again, it works, because in the background we have already built a role that contains SU01. And of course, we would not build a role for every transaction and authorization object. We only do that for the ones that are on our whitelist that you can modify. And that's indicated by the green lines. Green line means whatever was missing was on the whitelist, and we automatically created a role for that. Everything on the blacklist is what we deem critical, and we did not create that role. And everything that's in gray here is on the so-called gray list, and there you can decide how you want to handle that. So that's a great tool for your testers. If you still want to go through the traditional testing effort, you can use the role builder, and your testers will never get stuck. They can always try again and keep going with the testing. Once you've done your testing, be it either through the productive test simulation or the automatic role building or a combination thereof, you can go live with a module that we call times or exciting times, believe it or not. And exciting times allows you to significantly reduce the risk during a go live. And it's really the opposite, the flip side of the productive test simulation, because with exciting times, you can assign your newly created roles to your users during go live, of course. You assign the old roles to the reference user, and you disassociate the reference user from the user. But you keep it there if it's necessary. And if the user happens to run into an issue where we have absolutely forgotten a certain transaction that the user doesn't need very often, but at this particular moment during go live, the user needs to execute I don't know, SU01 and can't. But it used to work with the old roles. So in that moment, the user can go to a self-service portal and say, hey, give me my old roles back for the next 5 hours because I need to execute this transaction. It used to work and now it doesn't work anymore. And that's also handled through a simple mapping of your dialog user with a reference user, and you can have multiple reference users mapped to one dialog user. And when the user runs into an issue, goes to the self-service portal and checks out, so to say, the reference user, gives a reason maybe, and a session time, and that's it. And then the user has the old roles back for a temporary period of time. So it's very similar to firefighter or emergency access management, and it can be used for that purpose, but it's in this particular case, it's meant to be used to give old roles back to the user. So it's not elevating access, it's just giving back old access, if you will. You can also use this in a backup user concept. So if one person goes on vacation, someone else is supposed to take over his job during that time, you can use Xiting to have the person who's taking over check out a reference user that has the same roles as the person who went on vacation. And you can obviously build workflows around that. You can say someone has to pre-approve before that reference user assignment takes place, or the reference user assignment happens immediately, and then someone else signs off on that after the fact. So you have either or options here. And that really reduces the risk during go live, because the worst that can happen is that the user has to go to the transaction, say, give me my old roles back, acknowledge it, and continue working. There is no need to wait for a role admin to fix the role that may be missing something. And during that session, if you were actually, if you went into SU01, you would see that reference user assignment. So we use standard capabilities here of SAP through the reference user concept. The last module I'd like to cover for today is the security architect. The security architect delivers ready-to-use security concepts that you can then automatically compare with your SAP systems and their configuration. And the way it looks is it's very similar to a book. A security concept is a document with chapters that you can rearrange, that you can modify, that you can hide if you don't want them to be included. You can certainly rebrand that whole concept to match your own coloring scheme, to make it look like your own with your logo and everything. But what we deliver is pretty much ready to use as is. And we have concepts available for ERP, for GRC, for IDM, for Solution Manager, for Java, and very soon for HR and HANA as well. So you can load that concept and you can generate that concept document and export it as a PDF. You've got I don't know how many pages, maybe 100 pages or so, that describe exactly how SAP is supposed to be set up. In addition to that, we have built-in checks for every chapter and area we cover. We have checks built in that can test your connected systems. So if you install a security architect on your solution manager, we can reach out to all the connected systems and check them for compliance with the concept. And then you can show the results of those checks either in a table form or even in line with the document. And I'm going to show you how it looks like in a table view, where I've simply pulled up the system security settings, and I can see here my demo system and my demo system in client 001 with the checks that I failed in red and the ones in green and the ones where there is a warning, where there may be something that needs to be addressed. And then I can drill down on every single of those parameters and test results, and I can see exactly where the discrepancy is between, in this very simple example, password lengths. You know, how are my password lengths set up in my systems versus what I have defined in my concept, and how does that compare? But we have, you know, if we go back here two screens. We test for user administration issues, authorizations and roles, connectivity, naming conventions, standard SAP security settings. So there is a very comprehensive list of checks that we perform against your systems. And you can use that in preparation to a security audit, or you can just do that on a regular basis to make sure that your systems are properly set up and maintained. And with every check you execute, we save it to the check history if you wish to do so. And then you can go into a comparison mode to see how your systems tested this year maybe versus last year. So you can see progress and make sure you have actually improved upon the findings from the last security audit. Real quick, from a licensing perspective, we typically license based on users. That means dialog users and technical users. We do not care about ESS or MSS type of users, since they typically don't require a lot of role redesign. You can rent the software for the duration of a project, or you can license it perpetually, so you would own it and just pay standard maintenance and support. This is the OSS node I was referring to in the beginning of this webinar, where SAP Consulting specifically recommends the use of the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite for the purpose of optimizing RFC user authorizations. And we've done this a number of times. We can do this risk-free. We have a number of customers that have hundreds of RFC interfaces that partly only exist in production, and there is obviously a high risk involved in touching those interfaces, but using the XAMS and some of the capabilities that you have seen is like the productive test simulation or the automatic role building and the SU24 optimization specifically for RFC interfaces and function modules. We can deauthorize those interfaces and give them roles that fit exactly what they need without risking your interface breaking. There is also a very good video. It's more of a high-level business type of video that lays out the value proposition of the XAMS. It's on YouTube. Just look for Xiting and you'll find it. And here are some of our customers. Again, this meeting is recorded. Here is my contact information. If you have any questions that you would that we cannot address right now. But with that being said, I'm going to open it to questions, so you can use your questions box in the GoToMeeting control panel to ask me any questions you may have, or please, reach out to me offline, mkummer@xiting.us. You'll also get an email from me with a link to the recording, so you can just respond to that and ask me any questions then.